Officiellement, Monsieur H débarque à l'aéroport d'Elisabethville sans troupes, mais suivi à très bref délai de gardes du corps qui tous portent le casque bleu. Ils sont extrêmement nombreux, presque aussi nombreux que les soldats de l'armée katangaise, dont vous avez vu toutes les automitrailleuses alignées sur la piste. Accompagné de Monsieur Tchombe, Monsieur H ne peut s'empêcher d'identifier un drapeau qu'officiellement il ne connaît pas. Et c'est l'arrivée des troupes de l'ONU, le début de la mise en application de la résolution du Conseil de sécurité. Monsieur H a réaffirmé que les troupes de l'ONU n'interviendraient pas dans les différends intérieurs entre les Katangais et les Congolais. Tout se passera sans heurts, tandis que dans le reste de notre ancienne colonie, les frictions commencent à se multiplier entre les casques bleus et les soldats de Monsieur Lumumba. Mais ceci cesse d'être du ressort de la Belgique.
Tchombe had threatened to fire on United Nations troops if they came to Katanga, so Hammarskjöld had personally flown in with them. He refused to leave the airport until he knew they were safely landed.
À ce moment-là, bien sûr, la guerre froide était à son paroxysme, ce qui signifie qu'il y avait une polarisation entre le bloc occidental et le bloc oriental. Et chaque bloc utilisait le chaos interne pour favoriser ses propres intérêts, finançant ce parti ou cet autre, cette tribu ou cet autre, de façon à les monter les uns contre les autres. La tension était devenue si grande que le secrétaire général, je ne devrais pas dire ça, mais il était en quelque sorte très prudent dans ses déclarations au Conseil de sécurité et à l'Assemblée générale. Mais néanmoins, dans cette situation, il n'avait pas hésité à dire que nous pouvions nous diriger vers une guerre internationale du fait de toutes ces tensions, et pas seulement à cause des combats internes au Congo.
Hammarskjöld did see Tchombe. Tchombe agreed to start the withdrawal of Belgian troops. Hammarskjöld flew off in a more relaxed frame of mind. He'd established a military presence in Katanga, but his success was illusory. He planned to stop off at Leopoldville on his way back to New York and smooth things over with Lumumba. But Lumumba refused to meet Hammarskjöld and claimed that the United Nations was only in the Congo at the invitation of the central government and had no right to deal directly with Katanga as if it was an independent state. This rift between Hammarskjöld and Lumumba was to be fatal.
You've got to remember that it takes two to make a misunderstanding. And the Prime Minister, Lumumba, was a remarkable, very young man, who I must say, I think everybody would agree, his friends and his critics alike would agree, that he was extremely difficult to manage. He was very, very volatile, extremely forthright, and also tended to change his mind very often.
Hammarskjöld now faced attacks on the UN by Lumumba and the Congolese central government.
At a moment when the United Nations force was deployed in strength in Katanga, at a moment when the Belgian withdrawal was underway even from the Kamina base, the actions and attitudes of the United Nations, and in particular of its Secretary General, came under severe criticism from the Prime Minister of the Congo. This criticism was followed by a series of actions against officials in the service of the United Nations, which, whatever the immediate cause might have been for those actions, gave an impression of deep distrust and hostility fomented for political ends.
Lumumba, feeling that the UN was working against his interests, did precisely what Hammarskjöld was trying to avoid. He turned to the Russians for help. Within a week, Russian trucks and transporters were ferrying Congolese troops to the borders of Katanga, but they never got there.
We must remember that at this time there was a major act of genocide going on in one part of the Congo, in the Baluba country, where the army had got loose and was massacring the Baluba in large numbers, and this was a horrifying situation. And the fear was that if this kind of thing spread on a tribal basis to Leopoldville, where there was a much larger population concentrated, and also far more members of the army, and if you had both of the contenders for power, Kasavubu and Lumumba, appealing to the population to come out in the streets and support them, you would end up in a disastrous situation.
The UN peacekeeping force found itself surrounded by increased rioting and disorder. President Kasavubu's long-standing mistrust of Lumumba and his advisors came to a head. On the 5th of September, on Radio Leopoldville, he dismissed Lumumba. He appointed a new Prime Minister, Ileo. On the same day, Lumumba retaliated by dismissing Kasavubu. The UN, in a panic and without consulting Hammarskjöld, closed the radio station and the airport. In the middle of this political chaos, the UN, in order to prevent further mutiny in the army, voted money to pay the troops. Colonel Mobutu, head of the army, distributed the cash, an enormous boost to his status. Colonel Mobutu was only 30, an ex-journalist. He'd been an admirer and firm supporter of Lumumba, but now disapproved of his foreign advisors and lack of administrative grip. Mobutu was a nervous man at this time, but he had a future. The CIA station chief in Leopoldville was one of the few who didn't underestimate him. 2 days later, to the surprise of all, Colonel Mobutu announced that he was neutralizing the politicians until they could come to an agreement. He also expelled the Soviet and Czech embassies. Technically, the army had taken over. The UN still backed Kasavubu, but now they had to deal with Mobutu. Lumumba was struggling to rally support and increasingly afraid of what Mobutu might do to him. Each day brought a new drama. Mobutu had discovered Lumumba in one of the army camps, apparently rallying supporters.
Rien à faire, nous devons marcher à fond, même conclure des accords avec le diable pour refaire l'unité du Congo. Rien à faire. Et le Congo restera un et indivisible.
Finally, the UN managed to smuggle Lumumba out of a back door. Now they had him on their hands. In New York, Khrushchev launched a personal attack on the Secretary General. He accused Hammarskjöld of supporting Mobutu and called for his resignation.
I shall remain in my post during the term of office as a servant of the organization in the interest I shall remain in my post during the term of my office as a servant of the organization in the interest of all those other nations as long as they wish me to do so. In this context, the representative of the Soviet Union spoke of courage. It is very easy to resign. It is not so easy to stay on. It is very easy to bow to the wish of a big power. It is another matter to resist. As is well known to all members of this assembly, I have done so before on many occasions and in many directions. If it is the wish of those nations who see in the organization their best protection in the present world, I shall do so again.
The crudeness of Russia's attack on Hammarskjöld swung the Afro-Asians, whose support was vital to Hammarskjöld, more firmly behind him. As long as Lumumba stayed in his house in Leopoldville, the UN guaranteed to protect him. But on the night of the 29th of September, he escaped in the back of a car, determined to join his political supporters in Stanleyville.
If Lumumba had reached Stanleyville, which was his political fief and stronghold, there was certainly a danger that he would declare that the government of the Congo was there in Stanleyville.
Four days later, Lumumba, apparently careless of his own safety, was caught by Mobutu's soldiers and brought back to Leopoldville. The UN troops, under orders, did not intervene.
Patrice Lumumba comes back to Leopoldville a prisoner. The former Congo premier, who was captured when he fled inland, no longer wears the tuft of whiskers on his chin that helped to identify him. His arrest provoked several clashes between Lumumba followers and Congolese army troops. But Congo's strongman, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, shown as he watches Lumumba arrive, says he is prepared to put down any uprising. At the same time, the Soviet Union has been demanding Lumumba's release and immediate talks at the United Nations. A soldier tries to stuff into Lumumba's mouth a crumpled speech asserting his claim to power. The former premier shows no emotion. It may be the end of a chapter, but not yet the end of the Congo story.
Even as a prisoner, Lumumba was a dangerous political opponent, capable of rallying troops to his side. As long as he was alive, he was a threat. The solution was to send him to Katanga.
We have all learned this morning by an announcement by the Katanga authorities of the reported death of Patrice Lumumba and two of his colleagues. This is distressing and deplorable news.
The colonizers have committed many crimes against colonized peoples, as we know. But the characteristic of this new crime resides in the fact that it has been committed under the blue flag of the United Nations.
The Security Council debated the Lumumba murder, Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld encountered Russian demands that he should resign. Dag remained calm. He had the warm support of the Western nations and the firm personal backing of America's new man at UNO, Adlai Stevenson, who said the United Nations must stay in the Congo.
The United States government believes and proudly believes that the single best and only hope of the peoples of the world for peace and security lies in the United Nations.
I think that's a very convenient theatrical device, but I think it has no relation whatsoever to reality or to Hammarskjöld's character. I mean, I don't recollect any proved instance of his telling lies, for example. On the contrary, he was an embarrassingly honest man, as I think Mr. O'Brien should know himself. I think that the notion, which, as I say, it's perfectly all right for the theatre, that a person who has been elected twice to that enormous responsibility is some kind of neurotic, messianic freak and hasn't been found out in nearly 10 years is also the purest nonsense. I don't think it's true. I think that Hammarskjöld was an extremely serious, very highly responsible, very honorable man who got caught up in a series of situations where you literally couldn't win. And he did his best by his own lights and his own principles to do what he could. And I must say that I think the notion, for example, that he sacrificed either himself or Lumumba is really not the way people are.
On February the 20th, Hammarskjöld informed the Security Council of the murder of 6 political supporters of Lumumba.
I bring this news to the knowledge of the Council with revolt and shock. My words in the letter to Mr. Kasavubu indicate my reaction. But in the light of what has now been brought out, I would use much stronger language. It should be inconceivable to flout in this way basic values upheld by the organization. It is, Mr. President, for the Council to judge how this latest development, following the assassination of Mr. Lumumba and others, should influence the United Nations actions in relation to the Congo and the various groups in the Congo.
The position of the Soviet Union is as follows. The termination within 1 month of the so-called United Nations operation in the Congo. The removal of Hammarskjöld from the post of Secretary General as an accomplice and organizer of the slaughter of the leading statesmen of the Republic of the Congo.
Impassible au déroulement de ce qui est déjà l'affaire Lumumba.
Non, je ne me suis jamais occupé de lui.
Quelles peuvent être, à votre avis, les répercussions au Congo et singulièrement au Katanga à l'annonce de la mort de Patrice Lumumba?
Comme vous savez, n'est-ce pas, au Katanga, les gens ont fêté. La majorité a fêté. Les Baluba ont été d'ailleurs découragés.
Pour la première fois, on verra apparaître au Katanga les fameux mercenaires, les affreux, comme ils s'appelaient eux-mêmes. Le Katanga indépendant a besoin d'eux pour faire face à 2 dangers menaçants, l'armée nationale congolaise et surtout la rébellion des Baluba armés qui occupent tout le nord Katanga. Aux Nations Unies, on condamne ce type d'opération. Et de résolution en résolution, on aboutira à celle du 21 février 1961 qui proclame l'unité du Congo, condamne la guerre civile et admet que les casques bleus puissent intervenir par la force s'il le faut. Mais rien ne pouvait arrêter le cours des événements. Le Katanga était en pleine guerre civile, guerriers à croisette, gendarmes katangais, mercenaires européens, les affreux, partaient à la reconquête du nord Katanga. À Mukulakoulou, quartier général Baluba, les soldats katangais incendiaient systématiquement les cases. Ce spectacle, nous le retrouverons à chaque étape. Et c'est le retour à Luena, où allait entrer sans coup férir la gendarmerie katangaise, qui faisait ainsi ses premières armes avec l'aide technique des mercenaires européens. La colonne montante vers Luena croise les camions des casques bleus marocains. L'occupation du charbonnage de Luena est terminée. C'est la première victoire katangaise. Les premiers blessés sont évacués par hélicoptère. Cette femme Baluba, réfugiée dans une case, avait reçu une rafale de mitraillettes. Bukama, où les deux groupes de la gendarmerie katangaise feront leur jonction. À Bukama, la bataille sera plus rude. Les Baluba résisteront, mais pas à armes égales. Que peuvent en effet les poupous, ces fusils que l'on charge par le canon de mitraille, de boulons contre les fusils mitrailleurs, les mitrailleuses et les mortiers. Atrocités, torture, actes de cannibalisme même, la guerre de brousse est trop souvent une lutte impitoyable où la peur explique parfois la cruauté. Les gendarmes katangais ont récupéré quelques armes sur leurs ennemis. Un gourdin, un revolver poupou, ce n'est cependant pas un jouet inoffensif, il tue. Les Baluba avaient aussi quelques armes automatiques. Armes traditionnelles et combien meurtrières, ces flèches empoisonnées qui vous font mourir en 3 minutes à peine, il n'y a pas de contrepoison. Fièrement, les guerriers exhibent aussi devant nous leur butin de guerre, 4 femmes Baluba et leurs enfants. Le repos du guerrier est la loi du plus fort. Étrange pays où les morts eux-mêmes n'ont pas de paix. 400 squelettes de Baluba pourrissent ici à quelques kilomètres de Lengwe parce que les Baemba de Monsieur Tshombe refusèrent d'enterrer leurs ennemis morts.